Hey guys, this is Issues with Toddy One Skip. I am Toddy One Skip. Welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for allowing me to be part of your day and for allowing me to be part of this great community. I so appreciate it. Guys, I wanted to talk to you about Mark David Chapman. Mark David Chapman is the man that's responsible for me not being able to see the Beatles live. Whether they were going to get back together or not, there was always hope until Mark David Chapman took that hope away on December 8th, 1980, around 11 o'clock at night in New York City, as John Lennon was getting out of his limousine and entering the doorway of the Dakota apartment building across the street from Central Park. He heard Mr. Lennon, he turned around, and he was shot several times by a man who just hours earlier asked him for his autograph. A man that had come from Hawaii, who used to be a massive fan, to New York for the sole purpose of unaliving John Lennon. We all have soundtracks in our lives. We all have songs that take us to places. That's the magic of music. That's the magic of songs, is they can take us right away back in time to moments that we want to relive or we don't want to relive. It's kind of like a smell. You close your eyes and you see where you were. Everybody has like a soundtrack of their life, and it's composed of several songs, several bands, sometimes bands that make incredible impacts and they keep resurfacing, their songs keep resurfacing, or you aspire for that love if it's a love song. Those were the songs, you know. John Lennon was part of that. Now, I was born in the 60s, so they broke up about 6 years after I was born. And my parents weren't Beatle fans. I found John Lennon when I was about 13, 14, 15 years old. And I was devastated. I was 17 years old when somebody unalived him and took the possibility of me ever seeing the Beatles together away. There was no more songs. And I know that they had broken up, and I know that we were believed to think they'd never get back together. But there was no guarantee of that. There was hope until it was taken from us. Why? This guy, Mark David Chapman, took it very personal when John Lennon became mainstream, when he was a sellout, when he said that he thought, John, when he thought that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus. That's not what he meant. He was saying that they were more well known at the time. Not that they were more popular per se, but that the kids would say that they want to meet the Beatles before they'd ever say that they want to meet God. You know what I'm saying? That's what he was saying. And it was taken wrong. And some people were very insulted by that, what John Lennon said. But that's not, this guy, Mark David Chapman, he had a whole list of people that he wanted to unalive. And John was on that list. But again, he had asked John for his autograph just hours before. John was his favorite Beatle until he wasn't. But in an instant, in front of John's wife, whether you like Yoko or not, John was coming home to his son, his 5-year-old son at the time. And underneath where Sean was sleeping, his dad was taking his last breath. Mark David Chapman is still in prison. I don't think he's ever going to get out. He's 68 years old. He's in Greenhaven, again, upstate New York. I just talked about Son of Sam, David Berkowitz, upstate New York. They're not in the same prison. He was a security guard. Mark David Chapman was a security guard, married to a beautiful woman, and I believe they're still married. How messed up is that? He tried to get off on like schizophrenia, but he wasn't. He didn't get off. He got 20 years to life. He's been denied each time. I don't have a problem with him spending the rest of his life in prison. It's amazing that nobody has unalived him. He definitely... So, he had a book in his hand. Catcher in the Rye, Holden Caulfield. That was the main character of the book. It's kind of like King of the Mountain. If you're younger and you played like... I didn't. In Florida, you don't have mountains. But it's you try to keep everybody off of your mountain. I read it a long, long time ago. So there's some information while looking up Mark David Chapman, that he had gone to Woodstock. I used to live in Woodstock, New York. That he had gone to Woodstock, New York, and he was looking for Todd Rundgren, who had a studio, Bear Studio, I think it was, or Little Bear Studio in Woodstock. I remember that studio is still there. It's just called something different now. But anyway, Todd Rundgren was he did that song "Love Is the Answer." I think a lot of you guys know who Todd Rundgren is. Anyway, I like Todd Rundgren. Mark David Chapman, another obsession of his was Todd Rundgren, and he also accosted singer James Taylor. He also reportedly offered cocaine to a taxi driver. So, James Taylor said, and this is new information, I didn't know this. James Taylor said on December 7th, the day before Mark David Chapman unalived John Lennon, that Mark David Chapman had accosted him, James Taylor, at the 72nd Street subway station. According to Taylor, this is in quotes, this is what James Taylor says to the police about Mark David Chapman. The guy had sort of pinned me to the wall and was glistening with maniacal sweat and talking some freak speak about what he was going to do and his stuff with how John was interested and he was going to get in touch with John Lennon. So it doesn't make any sense. Chapman took the combat stance after he said Mr. Lennon, and John turned around, and 5 hollow point bullets from a .38 special revolver is what he shot at John Lennon. I remember the next day, I didn't know that John Lennon had died that night, that John Lennon had died. It was around 11 o'clock when they announced it. It was during a ball game, but I didn't know that. It was during, I think, the World Series. But the next day, I was going to the movies. Now, mind you, I was 17. I was going to the movies the next day, and I remember seeing in the movie, in the mall, when there was malls, that in the record store, when there was record stores, that they had these posters of John Lennon up, and it was the one that they had up everywhere was the one New York City. The one with the shirt that said New York City, the black and white one with the shirt that said New York City, the muscle shirt. And it said 1940 to 1980, and I remember saying, what? Like, what? And then I just saw the outpouring of people when I saw the news. I was devastated because, again, I had really just found John Lennon. So I had just found the Beatles, but recently I had just found them independently of each other. And there were so many great songs that, I mean, as somebody who's a songwriter, and you could see, as somebody who is a songwriter, there's so much more that we missed out on when it came to John Lennon. And these crimes, you know, even the Berkowitz crime, what it takes away from people. I'm sitting here, I was a John Lennon fan, But I mean, not a John Lennon fan where I was in love with John Lennon and Beatlemania, because clearly that was well before my time. I was a fan of the music and what he had to say and his spirit, because when I had seen John Lennon at that time, you know, I had watched him go from the long hair and the political stuff. Like, you'd hear about it in the background if your parents watched the news. And then Imagine, when that song Imagine came out, like, you definitely, anybody, there was just so many great songs of John Lennon. And I mean, there was a million people that cried that day or the next day when they had the vigil. No, it was really devastating. I went, and I had mentioned this in another video. I had went to Liverpool, and I went to John Lennon's home where he lived with his Aunt Mimi, and saw like his artwork when he was a child and stuff. He had this incredible imagination, a very sick sense of humor, but genius as well, very borderline there. And John Lennon, as we know, could be very cruel. We know that. I mean, his son will tell you that, and I don't think it's out of spite. I think it's true. So we heard some rough stuff when it came to John Lennon, that he was a horrible drinker, and there's some nastiness when it comes to John Lennon. But I think as he was getting older, he was starting to mellow out. I don't know what would have been of him and Yoko. Nobody knows the future. But nothing is now. And as of December 8th, 1980, nothing was going to be. But it's amazing. If you guys, I have a lot of UK subscribers. Do you guys, have any of you been to the Beatles experience in Liverpool, or been to John Lennon or Paul McCartney's place? I've been there. I've been to Pete Best, not the Cavern Club, the place that Pete Best, that really small, tiny place that Mona Best had in the cellar. So that was really cool. I forget the name of that. I gotta look it up, and I'll put it up there. So guys, I just wanted to put this video out there because John Lennon and music have always been really, really important to me. And I often wonder where John's music would have taken him. Like David Bowie, another one of my favorites. The change in, he followed it. Elton John, another one. Paul McCartney. Like, there are just incredible, iconic musicians that have stayed current, and their music has reflected decades. John was recording music again. He had taken a 5-year hiatus, and he had just gotten back in the studio, just released Double Fantasy, and was working on his next album. Milk and Honey is what that album ended up being called. So he was getting back into music. He was getting back into writing stuff. God only knows what we would have heard, how he would have changed with his music in time, or how he would have changed music in his time. Just like he did when he was part of the Beatles. We'll never know. But more than anything, Mark David Chapman, on December 8th, 1980, robbed 2 boys of their dad. And one of those boys, John really needed to mend his relationship, because Julian really got no closure. And Julian has to live with that for the rest of his life, and he's struggled with that. So not only were we ripped off, but obviously, I mean, unfortunately, John's aunt, Mimi, the one that raised him, she adored him. I mean, she was strict. We've heard things about Mimi, but I also saw her house. He had bought her a house on the coast on an island right off of the coast. I had seen that, but I didn't go into that house. I went into the house in Liverpool and Paul's house in Liverpool. And I saw George's house. I don't think I went into that house. And Ringo's house. Um, they weren't houses. Neither was Paul's. Paul's was in like this little small development where they were all attached and didn't have an inside bathroom, if I remember correctly. Paul's house. I think that they had an outhouse. Where John's house, I remember, stood out because John's house was a proper house. It was really nice. And in order for Mimi had raised John with her husband, and then her husband had died, and she was getting boarders that used to come in and rent rooms. Anyway, so those of you that want to know about John or his discography, I think that there's a lot of songs that would surprise you that John Lennon had written. And did you know, by the way, that Paul McCartney was the one that found James Taylor? He was the one that brought James Taylor onto the Apple Records. Did you guys know that? There's a little bit of trivia for you guys. And George Harrison, come on, he came out with, I remember I was a restaurant manager. It was at Swenson's restaurant in Plantation, in Florida. And that song My Mind Set on You by George Harrison came out, and I said I said something about the Beatles, and people were like, why are you bringing the Beatles into this? And I was like, George Harrison was a Beatle. And like they didn't know it. It was just so anyway, I don't know. I threw that in there. I thought I'd share that with you guys. Do you think that Mark David Chapman should ever get out? He could stay in there. He could stay in there. Guys, please like, subscribe, and share. Tell me what you think in the comments. I appreciate you guys. I hope this was a fun video for what it was. And, it's something I wanted to talk about. So hopefully it'll bring up some memories, some favorite songs. What's your favorite song by John Lennon? Do you guys remember the movie Little Darlings with Tatum O'Neal and Kristen McNichol? Because I looked, you guys are my age. So that song, Oh My Love, that song, you know what I'm talking about? Oh My Love, for the first time in my life, my eyes are wide open. So that's John Lennon. That was when he was with Yoko. So there's some great songs that I didn't even know that John had written. That's what this is. This is In My Life. You know that song, In My Life, obviously by the Beatles. Those are the lyrics to In My Life. A copy of the lyrics to In My Life. One of the best songs ever written, you know. There are places I remember all my life, though some have changed. All right, guys. I hope this was fun again. Woo! This is Issues with Toddy One Skip. I am Toddy One Skip. You guys take care. Don't forget, be better today than you were yesterday. Not half as good as you'll be tomorrow, and always be you.